How much did the rival families pay you to poison my mother's mind? Or were you just waiting for the ink to dry on her will before you finished the job? Dante Moretti's voice didn't just break the silence of the grand foyer. It shattered it like a bullet through crystal. He stood at the apex of the twin marble staircases, a silhouette of absolute, terrifying power. The glow of the 5-tiered chandelier caught the sharp lines of his charcoal suit, but his face remained in shadow, save for his eyes, slate gray, cold, and as unyielding as the mountains of Sicily, where his ancestors had first learned the art of the blood feud. Below him, Clara stood frozen. She was a small figure in the middle of the vast, echoing hall, clutching a silver tray that held a porcelain teapot and a small vial of heart medication. Her hands shook, causing the china to rattle with a rhythmic, nervous sound that seemed to irritate the man above. Clara wasn't a socialite or a spy. She was a nurse with tired eyes and a heart that had seen too much suffering. But in Dante's world, innocence was just a mask worn by the most dangerous players. "I asked you a question, Clara," Dante said, his voice dropping to a low, predatory growl as he began to descend the stairs. Each step was deliberate, heavy, with the weight of a man who owned the city and everyone in it. "My mother has changed her testament. She wants to leave a significant portion of the Moretti trust to you, a woman who has been in this house for less than 6 months. Tell me, what kind of magic did you perform in her bedroom to make her forget her own blood?" Clara finally found her voice, though it was thin and brittle. "I didn't perform any magic, Mr. Moretti. I simply listened to her. I held her hand when she had nightmares about the men you've buried. I treated her like a human being, not like a queen on a chessboard. If you think that's a crime, then perhaps the rot in this family starts with you." Dante reached the bottom step and closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He was a wall of muscle and expensive cologne, looming over her until she was forced to tilt her head back. He reached out, his fingers, calloused from years of handling steel, gripping her chin with a firmness that wasn't quite painful, but was entirely dominant. "Don't talk to me about rot," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "I have spent my life building a fortress to keep her safe. I have bled so she could sleep in silk. And then you walk in with your soft smiles and your simple life, and suddenly she's questioning everything I've done. You aren't a nurse. You're a leech. You saw an old woman weakened by a stroke, and you saw a golden opportunity." The suspicion had been growing in Dante's mind like a weed for weeks. It started with the secret laughter. Dante would often pass his mother's room and hear her laughing, a sound he hadn't heard since his father was killed 10 years ago. It should have made him happy, but instead, it made him paranoid. Why was she laughing with a stranger but silent with her son? The second clue was the ledger. Dante's head of security, Lorenzo, had flagged a series of small but consistent withdrawals from Donna Moretti's personal accounts. The money wasn't going to luxury shops or jewelers. It was being withdrawn in cash. Dante assumed Clara was pocketing it, building a nest egg for the day she would inevitably flee. The third clue was the most damning. Lorenzo had tracked Clara to a derelict part of the city during her afternoon off. He had photographed her meeting with a man known to be a low-level fixer for the Romano family, Dante's most vicious rivals. They were seen whispering in a dark corner of a cafe, exchange of a thick envelope taking place before Clara hurried back to the estate. To Dante, the puzzle was complete. She was a Romano plant, a honey trap designed to destabilize the matriarch and gain access to the Moretti secrets. Lorenzo found your friend in the East End, Dante said, his grip on her chin tightening slightly. He saw the envelope, Clara. Did you think I wouldn't notice my mother's money being funneled to the people who want me dead? Was that the price for the poison you're feeding her? Clara's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of guilt. They were tears of pure, unadulterated frustration. You see what you want to see, Dante. You live in a world of monsters, so you assume everyone you meet is one. That money, it wasn't for the Romanos. And that man, he isn't who you think he is. But I won't tell you. If I tell you, you'll ruin the only good thing left in the city. You have until dawn to pack your things, Dante said, releasing her with a shove that made the tea tray rattle. If I find you on this property after the sun rises, I won't be this gentlemanly. I don't care if my mother cries for a month. I am the head of this family, and I will not let a common thief dismantle what I have built. You are a ghost, Clara. Start acting like one. He turned his back on her, walking toward his private study. He felt a strange, hollow victory. He had protected the empire. He had exposed the rat. But as he sat in his leather chair, pouring a glass of amber whiskey, the silence of the house felt heavier than it ever had before. He looked at the security monitors. He saw Clara walking slowly down the long, moonlit driveway, carrying a single suitcase. She didn't look back. She didn't pause. She walked with the posture of a woman who was leaving a prison, not a palace. Dante watched until her small figure disappeared into the midnight fog, unaware that he had just committed the biggest mistake of his life. 2 days had passed since Clara's small figure vanished into the midnight fog. The Moretti estate was no longer a home. It was a tomb of marble and gold. Dante sat in his darkened study, the only light coming from the amber glow of a whiskey glass that hadn't left his hand for hours. He had won. He had secured his empire. He had cut out the cancer before it could spread. So why did his chest feel like it was collapsing under the weight of his own victory? He replayed the security footage of her exit 100 times. Clara hadn't walked like a thief caught in a lie. She had walked with a quiet, devastating dignity, the posture of a woman who had given everything and received nothing but thorns in return. Dante finally broke the silence of the West Wing, entering his mother's room. Donna Moretti sat by the window, staring out at the rain-slicked gardens. She looked frail, her skin like parchment, as if the very spirit had been drained from her the moment Clara left. "Mother, you need to eat," Dante said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Donna didn't turn. Her voice was a haunting whisper that cut deeper than any blade. "You think you saved me, Dante? You've only reminded me why I hate this life. You've sent away the only person who didn't look at me and see a bank account or a liability. You've sent away the only person who saw my soul." "She was meeting with the Romanos, Mother," Dante roared, his frustration boiling over. "She was taking your money and handing it to the wolves." Donna Moretti finally looked at him, a sad, knowing smile on her lips. "Did you ask her why, Dante? Or did you just assume, because suspicion is the only language you speak? You wear a crown of shadows, my son, and it has made you blind to the light." The doubt hit Dante like a physical blow. He called Lorenzo, his head of security, into the room. "I want the full history of that man Clara met, not just the surface-level report. I want every cent, every contact, every breath he has taken for the last decade, now. 3 hours later, a thick file landed on Dante's desk. As he scanned the pages, the whiskey glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. The man in the cafe wasn't a Romano fixer. He was a former driver who had quit the underworld 10 years ago to run an unauthorized orphanage in the East End slums. The withdrawals from Donna Moretti's account hadn't gone to luxury shops or Swiss banks. Every single dollar had been funneled into a medical trust for a 5-year-old boy named Leo, who was waiting for a life-saving heart surgery. Clara wasn't a leech. She was a bridge between the Moretti wealth and the dying children of the city. But the deeper he dug, the darker the truth became. Dante discovered that the Romanos had found out about the orphanage. They had tried to blackmail Clara, threatening to burn the building down with the children inside unless she provided the security codes to the Moretti estate. The report was clear. Clara had refused. She'd stood her ground, choosing to be disgraced, humiliated, and exiled by Dante, rather than betray the man she was serving. She had been a shield between his family and the Romanos, and in return, Dante had thrown her to the wolves. "Boss," Lorenzo's voice was pale, trembling. "There's more. The Romanos, they know she's no longer under your protection. They know she's at the orphanage right now. Our scouts just spotted a hit squad moving into the East End. They aren't going for information anymore. They're going for Blood to send you a message." Dante stood up, his chair clattering to the floor. The cold, clinical Mafia boss was gone. In his place was a man possessed by a primal, terrifying fury. He realized that for months, he had been the villain in his own story. "Get the cars," Dante whispered, a sound more frightening than his shout. "If a single hair on her head is touched, I will turn the city into an altar of Romano bodies." He grabbed his twin pistols, the metal cold against his palms. He didn't wait for his guards. He sprinted for his black Lamborghini, the engine screaming as he tore down the driveway. He wasn't driving for territory or power anymore. He was driving for the only person who had ever dared to look at him and see a man instead of a monster. As he sped toward the crumbling brick walls of the East End, Dante Moretti made a silent vow. He would burn the world down to bring her back, or he would die trying to earn the forgiveness he didn't deserve. The East End of the city was a labyrinth of shadows, a place where the streetlights had long since been shot out, and the air tasted of salt and industrial rot. Dante's Lamborghini tore through the narrow alleys, a black streak of vengeance. His heart was a drum, echoing the one truth he'd spent a year trying to ignore. Clara was the only clean thing in his life, and he had thrown her into the dirt. As he reached the outskirts of the warehouse district, he saw them. 3 black SUVs parked outside a crumbling 3-story brick building. The front door of the orphanage had been kicked off its hinges. Dante didn't wait for his backup. He didn't call for a tactical plan. He skidded the car to a halt, drawing his twin pistols before the engine had even stopped screaming. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of kerosene. The Romanos didn't just want Clara. They wanted to erase the one thing she loved. Dante moved through the ground floor with the lethal grace of a predator. He found the first guard in the hallway, a man holding a gasoline canister. Dante didn't hesitate. One shot, silenced and clinical, dropped the man before he could scream. He climbed the stairs, his boots silent on the rotting wood. On the second floor he heard it, the crying of children. A group of 5 toddlers were huddled in a corner of the dormitory, their eyes wide with a terror no child should ever know. Standing over them was a Romano soldier, his rifle leveled at the door. Dante didn't just shoot, he roared, a sound of primal fury that froze the soldier's blood. In the split second of hesitation, Dante fired. The man fell, and Dante was already moving, shielding the children with his own body as he scanned the room. "Stay down," Dante whispered, his voice cracking. "I am here for her. Stay down." The third floor was the infirmary. Through the cracked glass of the door, Dante saw her. Clara was tied to a chair in the center of the room. Her lip was split, and a dark bruise was forming over her cheekbone. But her eyes, those defiant, beautiful eyes, were fixed on the man standing in front of her. Silvio Romano's nephew, Marco, was laughing as he held a jagged blade to Clara's throat. "Dante Moretti threw you out like trash, sweetheart. Why do you still protect his secrets? Tell us where the ledger is, and maybe I'll let these little rats live." "He's already here," Clara whispered, a faint smile touching her bloody lips. The door didn't just open, it exploded off its hinges. Dante stepped into the room, his silhouette framed by the flickering emergency lights. He looked like a god of death. "Step away from her, Marco," Dante said, his voice a low, vibrating promise of extinction. "I'm not here to talk business. I'm here to collect what belongs to me." Marco laughed, pressing the blade deeper until a thin line of red appeared on Clara's neck. "You're outnumbered, Moretti. My men are all over this building." "Your men are dead," Dante replied coldly. "And you're next." Marco panicked. He pulled Clara up, using her as a human shield while reaching for his gun. Dante didn't blink. He knew the trajectory. He knew the risk. As Marco fired, Dante didn't dive for cover. He stepped into the path of the bullet, the lead searing through his shoulder, his blood spraying onto the white tiles of the infirmary. The pain was a white-hot scream in his nerves, but it didn't slow him down. Dante fired twice. The first bullet took Marco in the shoulder, spinning him away from Clara. The second bullet found its mark. Dante collapsed to one knee, his breath coming in ragged gasps as blood soaked his charcoal suit. Clara struggled against her ropes, her voice a frantic sob. "Dante! Oh God, Dante!" He crawled to her, his fingers fumbling with the knots. His hands, usually so steady, were shaking with a mixture of blood loss and pure, unadulterated relief. When the ropes finally fell away, Clara didn't run for the door. She threw her arms around him, pulling his head to her chest. "You're an idiot," she sobbed, her tears mixing with the blood on his shirt. "You're a blind, arrogant idiot." "I know," Dante choked out, his eyes closing for a brief second as he breathed in the scent of her. Soap and antiseptic and courage. "But I'm your idiot." The night wasn't over. Outside, the sounds of more engines approached. More Romanos. Dante struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on Clara. "We have to get the children out. They'll burn the place down to cover their tracks." Romano Hit Squad. They found a wall of Romano Hit Squad. They found a wall of people. The dock workers of the East End, the fathers whose children Clara had cared for, the men who Dante had ignored for years, they were all there. They had heard the gunfire. They had seen the Romano SUVs. Armed with wrenches, pipes, and hunting rifles, The people of the slums had formed a human circle around the orphanage. The remaining Romano soldiers, terrified by the sheer number of angry citizens, stayed in their cars. For the first time in history, the invisible people of the city had stood up to the monsters. Dante looked at the crowd, then at Clara. He realized then that power didn't come from fear or bank accounts. It came from this. It came from being a man worth fighting for. Take them to the estate, Dante commanded Lorenzo, who had finally arrived with the Moretti backup. Tell my mother, the garden is open. Every child, every nurse. They stay with us. They are Morettis now. As the convoy of black cars moved toward the safety of the mansion, Dante sat in the back, his hand gripped tightly in Clara's. The war with the Romanos had just become a war for the soul of the city. And for the first time in his life, Dante Moretti knew he was on the winning side. The healing of the Moretti estate didn't happen overnight. For weeks, the grand mansion, once a fortress of cold secrets, echoed with the sound of children's laughter and the frantic, hopeful energy of a house reborn. Dante's mother, Donna Moretti, sat in the sunroom, no longer a ghost in her own home, but a grandmother to a dozen orphans who knew nothing of the blood that had paid for the marble floors they played on. Dante, however, remained a man in the shadows. He sat in his study, his shoulders still in a sling from the bullet he took for Clara, watching the city skyline. He had saved the girl. He had saved the children. But the Shadow King knew that peace was a fragile thing. To truly be free, he had to destroy the very world he had built. The final liquidation. It's done, Lorenzo whispered, stepping into the study. He looked different now, less like a mercenary and more like a man who had seen the light. He placed a single silver tablet on Dante's desk. Every shipping line, every port authority, every offshore account linked to the Romano family and the Moretti syndicate. It's all been liquidated. The money has been transferred to the trust. Dante looked at the numbers, billions of dollars, a fortune built on fear, now destined for medicine and education. And the architects? Dante asked, his voice cold. They're panicking, Lorenzo replied. They didn't expect you to burn your own throne. Without your cooperation, their entire network in this city collapses. They're pulling out, Dante. You're too clean for them now. You've become a liability to their corruption. Dante nodded. He wasn't just retiring. He was performing a scorched earth policy on the underworld. He was the architect of Ash, and he was burning his own empire to the ground so that something better could grow in its place. The heart of the home. Clara entered the room carrying the silver tray, the same one that had rattled with her fear on the night of her exile. But today, her hands were steady. She set the tea down and walked behind Dante, resting her hands on his uninjured shoulder. Leo's surgery is scheduled for tomorrow, she said, her voice filled with a warmth that Dante still couldn't believe belonged to him. The doctors say his heart is strong. He's going to live, Dante, because of you. Dante reached up, covering her hand with his. Not because of me, Clara, because of you. You stood in that warehouse and faced death while I was busy counting my coins and nursing my pride. You're the one who saved this family. We are a family now, aren't we? She asked softly. Dante stood up, turning to face her. He looked at the woman who had walked into his house as a nurse and ended up being his savior. He didn't see a leech or a spy. He saw the only light he had ever known, We are whatever you want us to be, Clara. But from this day on, the name Moretti won't stand for fear. It will stand for what we've built together. 10 years later, the sun set over the hills of the Moretti Vance Medical Center. It was a masterpiece of glass and steel, standing where a derelict warehouse once rotted. A young man, barely 20, walked through the lobby in a white doctor's coat. On his lapel was a small silver pin, a wooden wolf. It was Leo. His heart was whole, his future bright. Dante stood on the balcony of the estate, watching Leo drive away toward his first night shift. He felt a hand slip into his. Clara stood beside him, her hair graying at the temples, but her eyes as defiant and beautiful as the day they met. He looks just like his father, Clara teased. I hope not, Dante laughed, pulling her closer. I hope he never has to know the weight of a gun or the coldness of a ledger. I hope he only knows how to heal. Dante Moretti had started as a man who burned things down. He ended as a man who watched things grow. The architect of Ash had finally found peace in the garden he had planted with the woman who refused to let him stay a monster. And that, everyone, is the end of Dante Moretti's redemption. A story that began with a poisoned suspicion and ended with a heart healed by love. It reminds us that no matter how deep the shadows of our past, the courage to change can build a future brighter than any empire. Dante didn't just save Clara, he saved himself by learning that the greatest power isn't the ability to take a life, but the strength to protect one. If you were moved by this journey from betrayal to justice, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more cinematic stories of moral triumph. Which part of Dante's transformation was your favorite? Let us know in the comments below.